back to the channel, everyone. I'm Sarah Christensen with One Sage's View Astrology, and I'm continuing the playlist that I'm creating for understanding the charts of the Bridgerton series. And we've done season 1, and I recommend exploring that video and understanding the astrology of the season 1 chart because it really gives us an idea of the pattern as it kind of fractals out across each season after season 2, season 3, season 4, etc. But in season 2, that's this video, we're going to focus on the release date of season 2 and understand kind of the planetary positions at the moment that released, understanding where we were as a collective that's going to be embedded within that planetary position at that time, and also look at how that shows up for the cast ensemble, how that shows up for the themes that are portrayed in season 2, and whatever other meanings that we can pull out of the chart from that perspective. And season 2 only has one chart, just like season 1, but that definitely has a tie back in terms of themes may have threads that kind of you can see from season 1 into the season 2 chart, and you can go back and forth between them if you like, and I might be able to pull some of those out during this particular exploration. So let's dive into the astrology and see what it has to offer us in insight, in reflection on this piece of art and the series of Bridgerton in season 2. Let's go. All right, let's take a look at season 2, where we have the co-leads are going to be Anthony Bridgerton, the Viscount Bridgerton, and Kathani or Kate Sharma. And we'll take a look at how that plays out for season 2. There we have them. Okay, so here is the chart for season 2. Release date was March 25th, 2022, and they would have been filming probably, I don't know if they were able to film at all in 2020, but maybe. And I'd have to look at the production notes. That's a possibility. But definitely in 2021, when we were able to get together collectively again after kind of they rose some of the limitations on social connection and social distancing, even though we were supposed to social distance, but we could actually connect and in a place where we were working and things like that. So the production stories for season 2 must be very interesting indeed, and kind of promptly want to go back and look at some of that. But what we see in the chart are a couple of things that kind of jump off right away for me. I always look at the ascendant because it gives me a sign of what we're focusing on for the mask of the production, or just kind of the moment that it comes to life. And because Netflix does the release of the seasons through midnight in the Pacific Daylight Time, because it's released for that entity, Netflix, their corporation headquarters being in California, Los Gatos, and that's where we create the chart from, Los Gatos, California. And even though it's kind of spread across the world in different time zones, but it's really released at the midnight hour. So that's always going to put the sun for these releases in the bottom of the chart. And it works quite interesting for Bridgerton, and it makes me wonder about the who's picking the release dates for Bridgerton, because I kind of wonder what they have in astrology, because we have, even though the sun is at the bottom of the chart, which it always will be, that release date gives the sun in Aries in March, just after the spring equinox. So it's a very powerful sun in Aries. This then lends to a trine with the identity of the particular show. And for season 2, we have this chart, and it has a rising sign of Sagittarius at 1 degree. And the sun in Aries offers a nice supporting trine fire energy. So a lot of action in this particular season. And it speaks to the kind of underlying theme that we see in Sagittarius. Is a sign that I look at for horses, and it's also fascinating to see Jupiter prominently down below, because the horses are a theme of both a large animal. Horses are so interesting to me from the astrology around them and in the myth that they kind of also gives us some meaning from the symbolism of the horse. We have the race, which is in episode 2. We have that kind of that first meeting is they're on horseback, I believe, running. She's moving swiftly on her horse on a ride, a morning ride. And I think that's how he connects with her, but he's not knowing who she is yet. And also there's the symbolism of kind of the precarious situation of the horse kind of in the closing part of season 2 with Kate Sharma's character, and how that's an important part of this because she is a well-trained, she's very solid on her horse. It would only be kind of a freak accident kind of thing at the end there, and it's kind of almost like it gives us a kind of a picture of the emotional chaos that she might be going through that sets up for that precarious situation in the end chapters of that season 2. But I love that horses are such a foundation of this season, and that we have Sagittarius rising in the first house on the ascendant at 1 degree, and that's action, a lot of action with that. We have the horse races of episode 2. That's also prominent in how we see very excitability out of the characters, and the moves that the Viscount Anthony takes to position himself closer to Edwina and Kate, and how that kind of gives us that. But also that Jupiter is such a prominent planet here in its own sign, its own domain of Pisces at the bottom of the chart. So it speaks to not only like that physicality movement, which is to me the fire energy, but we also have something that's going on in the imagination place within the Jupiter and Pisces, and it's multi-layered, and I love that it's multi-layered. It's the family that's coming from abroad, with the Sharmas coming into the Ton so that Edwina could find a match. They had already discounted that Kate could find a match. But the Jupiter in Pisces speaks to kind of this family that's coming from a foreign place. And we can also see the emphasis again also in the 9th house, with the Leo sign there on the cusp of the 9th house. That's also speaking to something important about the sun in Aries. And the match between, what's going to be a good match for Anthony, the Viscount, is someone who can match his energy and the tension that's going to, of course, play out in the season, which we love. And that is also here symbolized in this season release, that the sun is the ruler of the 9th house because that's the ruler of Leo. And we have this kind of, exclamation point, kind of like letting us know that this is going to be a lot of the instincts kind of taking over. But also how the characters may respond. That's another way that the instincts are. You kind of respond without thinking, but you also have like the action it's oriented towards a lot of action. And Anthony's character is always that action, fully going for the passions. And I think even Jonathan Bailey himself probably embodies that so much because of what you can see behind the scenes detail. But we have this component of the fire, the elements of fire, with the Leo, with the Aries here, and then the first house with the Sagittarius rising. And I just love that jumping right out of the gate, because it sets multiple things going on. But we have a Jupiter that's the ruler, that's in the water, that gives the connotation around the imagination. And I love kind of where they took the visuals in season 2 between the character of Anthony Bridgerton's character and Kate Sharma's character, and even Edwina. Okay, we're gonna take a look at going beyond the trine of fire element, and we're going to take a look now at another piece that I wanted to pick up. So we have the energy forward. We have the detail of the powerful sun in Aries, Jupiter that's in its own domain, and Pisces at the bottom of the chart. And this also speaks to other themes that are going on, because that Jupiter is also conjunct with Neptune in Pisces. This is a very powerful combination. And we also have Mercury. And Mercury in Pisces with the Neptune in Pisces, kind of creating a stellium of 3 planets, is interesting because it amplifies the imagination, the potential issues that they might have had on set filming in closed situations, closed doors, because they would still have to have this, the rules of engagement for doing doing a production at the time in 21 would have a lot of social distancing issues. And that is kind of reflected in the potential of possible contamination at the time with the Pisces, because things would pass very easily in closed quarters. So it's kind of interesting about that. But then over here in the third house, we have the stellium of the energy of Aquarius, which is the rules, which is the social distancing that at the time that would have been what was in the local environment and what we would all be having to adhere to, because Saturn would be giving us the limits during that time. So this is really important because this kind of sets up the frame of how they might have shot certain scenes and when they had to bring together collective groups, and how they would have to go through some probably behind the scenes testing and making sure that their crew and the cast were safe as they could be during that period of time, because there were still a lot of unknowns of certain things that we were experiencing at the time. This is present in the chart. It's kind of interesting to kind of get that behind the scenes what they faced as well. So the more they were outside, probably the better. So we do have a lot of outside shots between the races, the queen showing off the outside of the castle. I think she was showing off zebras or something. That's interesting, right? So there's a lot of scenes outside the hunting trip that they go on and these kinds of things. And I think that hunting was in episode 4. So those early episodes and how they were creating those. A lot of outside and a lot of horse time and that kind of thing. But we see that in the chart. So I've kind of like that's partly maybe how they even designed what they were going to write about, how they would put it together. And it may have been also, quite a challenge to put all the things together and not just the production, because they had filmed season 1 in 2019, and then the production I think would have been 2020 when they were kind of doing the finishing off of that, and then it was released in December with lots of them. I think there was marketing clear 6 months before that actually was released, so it had a lot of hype before it actually landed. And of course we were all stuck indoors quarantined in 2020. So Christmas Day also being released on Christmas Day, the season 1 would have amplified the available viewership, kind of like we're doing the holidays with let's watch this new show, this kind of thing that's been advertised in our mind, like what is this scene with this, at the time it was Duke Hastings, riding in on his horse, which is really a catchy visual for a period piece that would catch your eye because, Roger Jean Page, come on. Anyway, I remember that kind of imagery at the time back in 2020 when that was shared with us. Season 2, I don't remember as much promo because of how they might have had limits about how they could be on shows and doing the promo that showed up later in season 3, which went off the charts. But it's kind of interesting to kind of see that we don't have this array in the chart where there's a lot of planets in the upper half. And that would be out in the world where everything would be more underneath the horizon. So there would be a lot more behind the scenes, what's not visible to the world, and these kinds of things, only that we would see this great production. There would be some behind the scenes released later, but there would have had limits on how much of a marketing promo, that kind of thing. And also the feeling nature of having to work within this container of what we were all facing at that time. That does influence how they did certain things for the production of season 2. Season 2 is very interesting in that regard. I really liked the costume, how it evolved from season 1 to season 2. It was very interesting in the color palette and the way they did the gowns and the wigs and these kinds of things. So I really appreciated that. I think the designs for part of season 3 were a little heavy in their tonality, like in terms of sharp colors, more makeup kind of thing. And parts of it looked great, but then parts of it were like, whew, that's a lot of makeup and things that I think if they would have done a little bit softer palette would have maybe been more well received. I know there was some critique on that. But in season 2, I really loved the designs. I really loved Kate Sharma's outfit that she wore hunting. That was just chef's kiss. I love that. And what the gentlemen were wearing on that hunt was very interesting too, in terms of the detail. So detail in the costume, the imagination, that is that Jupiter and the Neptune and the Mercury in the Pisces, just how beautiful and imaginative that is. I also think that in the storyline, we have the themes that the bee sting is really important because it sets up, and we have in season 2 an amazing amount of backstory that's given to us about Anthony on the day that his father died from the bee sting. And we have an amazing amount of background on even the detail that he faced after that with Lady Violet Bridgerton and her birthing of Hyacinth. So Hyacinth's birth, which then had a ripple effect into Eloise, is very interesting, and how Daphne was comforting Eloise in what she could hear and overhear. So this season 2 gives us a lot of backstory, and I kind of look at this nodal structure as a part of that and find it very interesting because it speaks to the death, what's sitting in the unconscious mind of these siblings, and maybe even Lady Bridgerton. They give us a real view of Lady Bridgerton's grief in this kind of evolution of this, and also that kind of what the death does and the grief and how long it took to maybe overcome that, and then how that framed up Anthony Bridgerton as he would go about putting himself on the marriage mark, and also his kind of, his first season rakish self coming out and how he looked at that role of responsibility, but kind of also leaned into, well, I have many brothers, I have this out. If, if I don't do it, I have others I can get out. But it's about responsibility. He's having to understand his role of responsibility within the structure. And that's the moon in Capricorn, that it's sizing up this role of responsibility, that he is the firstborn son. So the responsibility is, given to him, and that he to bear a son, and this kind of traditional thinking of in this make-believe world of Bridgerton and the Ton, right? So what I love about it is that it still reflects within the astrology, the sense of responsibility, the fight of the individual in Anthony's character about this sense of responsibility, and also what the rules are. And so then he's just like, okay, I'm going to do it. And then, he works through a list, and they're not perfect. So he's looking for the perfect potential partner within the mix. And we see like his other that's coming in the scene here by that Gemini. And that's the two sister scenario that he's faced off with. I love that. And we also see where it can have a lot of confusion and the layers, because the Mercury is in Pisces. So the right person is right next to the younger sister, but he can't see it at first. And there's just this nice confrontation of tension and kind of like that whole enemies to lovers concept, for romance and for that genre. So it's kind of interesting to see how they play it out, right? And another thing that appears in this is kind of springtime, the bees. We have this kind of going on in the theme in the beginning, and also the sense of smell, because he's just caught up in that within when she's close to him. And also there is and that's the Taurus. Taurus is that sense of smell, right? And Venus is a part of that. What I love about that is also that Venus is in Aquarius. So there's like an interesting play here between Mars and Venus in the sign of Aquarius. But they square this nodal axis, north node, south node. So the north node in Taurus is that sense of smell, but it's also the beauty and that detail. But we have this kind of juxtaposition of the Venus with Mars and very close by, giving us this tension as this interrupter. It's almost like the fixed energy, the air, and the rules, because from the rules, Kate is too old for their marriage mark, and that's why Edwina is the sister that's put forward, and where they're kind of banking on the possibility for, her finding a great match, and that will help secure her future and what Kate has lived for. She pretty much devoted herself to that, providing Edwina all of this, etiquette and, sensibilities for being a great catch, I guess. So we see that in the Aquarian energy. And of course, that also gives us another layer of definition of the diverse, inclusive cast. We're having a beautiful exposure to women from India and Asia within this series, and what that looks like, and some of the traditions that they did in her preparation for Edwina's preparation for getting married, and what that would look like. So we had this nice, perspective. And that's what I love about the inclusivity, that Aquarian energy that is in Bridgerton, because it exposes us to these different places, culture, and experiences that can highlight our connection and how we might see others that are moving through some rituals that connect them on something very important, like, moving into marriage with someone. I find that was fascinating couple of scenes that they did, and how it kind of added something of high quality about beauty and the sense of connection to something bigger in that cultural scene that they had with the sisters and I think the mother. So I love that in this as well. The nodal axis having this square energy so the nodal axis with South Node in Scorpio, North Node in Taurus, and all of this is square right here to Saturn in Aquarius. That is at a high tension, and also gives the Juno right next to it. But we would also include Venus, and because it's in the stellium, it also would pull in Mars. And that gives that it's speaking a couple of things. The tension between the beauty, and life is more beautiful, especially when you're looking at something of death. Death makes life more beautiful. I like that contrast. But also this position of the service that Kate Sharma plays is an important part of the component that shows that she also has the capacity to fulfill that role when it comes into their connection. But there is that positioning in the third house, and the third house is the siblings. So this is like multi-layered. Not only is it giving us the context of, we have so much backstory in this season 2 about the siblings and how they might be understanding who they are and who they're becoming, and framing more as being, the children with a mother as their matriarch now. They've lost their patriarch, their father, and what that means for them and their identity. That's the Bridgerton family. Then the context of other families that they engage with. We have the Sharmas in this example, coming from a foreign place, coming into the Ton, and how they engage with them, and how they are fitting into the rules and aligning up with those rules. But at the same time, it's going to be the thing that is also how they might shift because of something that's deeper in the instinctual behavior of these other two characters, the two characters of Kate Sharma and, Viscount Anthony. So it's kind of be the tension, that's that square between these planets, and the rules of engagement and all that happens, because at the end of the day, you can follow all the rules of engagement, but it might not line you up where it makes sense. And there's something that might be deeper, more instinctual about the passions and actual connection that two people have that would be discovered over the course of the time. And I think that is great that this is the trope of enemies to lovers, and how that shows up. But it's in the context of all the things that Kate Sharma became in her own right. To give that in service to her little sister is exactly the very thing that puts her in the frame of eligibility, even though she's a little bit older. And here's the thing, fascinating as well, that is also an archetypal thing about Aquarius. The thing that shows up will take on the Aquarian structure, which would be, it's not going to be like the traditional way. It'll be something that moves against the status quo. So with Anthony, the Viscount, going, like, he's trying to make the logical decision to go towards Edwina. He thinks, okay, I'm logically making the right choice here, but his everything else is pointing him towards Kate in the series. And underneath it all, she does meet all the requirements in terms of, the dance, speaking, well educated, well read, has her own identity. Edwina has her own as well, but Kate even more so. But it's the age. And so the Aquarian thing in the context is the age of Kate, and which is totally funny that would be even on the shelf, age 26, goodness sakes, right? It just makes me laugh. But in the context of astrology, Aquarius, when you're looking at some relationships, there can be really interesting connections that people make, and they have a wide age gap. And it's a very Aquarian thing because there's a connection that's being made on different parts of the psychology of the two people. What is, synastry, the connection that's kind of bonding them together. And these can be very enduring and rich, full relationships, even with, a decade age or even more gap. And because there's something that the two souls are connecting on that's kind of doesn't make sense to other people, but it makes sense to them. And I love to see that in the mix of the Aquarius energy in the third house. And, it's, so fascinating to see how that would actually show up. And that's a very core theme of season 2 is Kate's age. Yeah, so that's fascinating to me. But also in the story, there's the whole understory of their mother and the situation where Kate's mother is also Edwina's mother, but they had 2 different fathers, I believe. So, and how Kate would have, held something about the mother's backstory and why Edwina had this potential, I guess, the dowry or whatever you call it, that was available to her from the parents if she married into a certain. So that was also part of the storyline, right? So there was rules to what was happening and who she would pick. And there was like that, big jeopardy if that was found out, which of course, is part of the Bridgerton. Replay the season 2 to kind of get more of that storyline. But that's also present here because we have other things about the wealth that was sitting there available through the dowry for Edwina getting married and who she would have to marry to get that. She had to have a certain level of marriage partner, future husband, to even have that attributed towards the marriage. So that's a tricky kind of part of the story that shapes the story as well. And that is in the Taurus and Scorpio money and resources detail of the nodal axis, and then that juxtaposition of how that sits on the third house of the sister, the sibling, right? And also then how the Bridgerton spins it as, I think the pickup was, don't need the dowry, even though that would be like a disrespectful thing back in the day, to not claim the dowry or whatever. But when the wealth is so much wealth, it's like, he's like, I don't need it. I'll get to pick who I want. Kind of thing. So there's that scenario in the storyline that is also picked up in that T-square of the nodal axis, T squared off the Saturn and Juno, which is, the marriage partner, and Venus and Mars. Now, another component of this in the stories of, the off stories, the side stories of season 2 is the incoming, I guess, whoever's going to take over the Featherington home, which is Uncle Jack, who's come from the Americas, who has these mines. And he's just creating chaos, of course, for the Featheringtons, which I love. I love all the side stories. It makes it interesting and fun. But then also how we get to see other characters play out with that storyline. Who played Jack was played by Rupert Young. And I have been also watching the Merlin series. More on that later, but he's in that. He's Rupert Young is in that. He's one of the knights, which is fun to see how these actors come up in other shows. We also see a lot of Madame Delacroix, the modiste, as she is interacting with Penelope. So a little bit of covert operation between these ladies running their businesses. And I really love that as well. And that's also kind of the financial that's kind of hidden, and the position of the Aquarian energy is the disruptor of the old ways, and Penelope's character connected to her Lady Whistledown detail, and the Madame Delacroix, and her role, being a woman, and how they connect, and how some of the starting. They're disruptors. They are feminine disruptors. It's like the Venus in there, and the action that they take being exactly who they are, but doing it in a discreet way so they can do it. One, not as discreet, but the image of Madame Delacroix that she has created was kind of outed by Marina Thompson's character, being able to speak French and knowing, oh, I know you're not from there. Kind of detail. I love that. But it's kind of like they are disruptors, these two women who are doing their own thing to make their own money in this kind of scenario. But kind of that Uncle Jack character and what is or isn't in his mind, and the whole ruse story that's created, and Portia, Lady Featherington's character, and how that plays out with Uncle Jack is also pretty fun. And then the ruse, what we find out about Portia Featherington, that she's always a mother. You don't know her if you don't know that she's a mother. So I just love all those details of season 2. There's just so many things that get picked up. We get a lot of wonderful backstory as well, and it's fun to see that and how that kind of emerges from that T-square in that particular release date. It's all there. Another piece is when you think of wealth and people's assets and money, you're talking about in just the signs, that's Taurus and Scorpio. But by houses, it is second house and eighth house, other people's money, because there's the whole ruse, that Uncle Jack eventually is going to go after people's money and set up this ruse, and he thinks Portia's in line and lining up with him on that. Well, again, there's going to be a disruption at the end of that, right? And we see also how Colin is playing a part in season 2 with his connection to Penelope and when he's figuring out things. But there's this connection between the second house and the eighth house, which are the personal assets of the Ton, and the families of the Ton. That's the wealthy families of the Ton. And, that's kind of the Capricorn energy of the wealth, the traditional wealth, the rules of the game as it's played. Moon is here in the second house, and it's kind of tied to the eighth house because that's Cancer in the eighth house. We get this multi-layer about assets and money and legacy, but Jack is going after it in a weird, in a con way, and he's sized up, Lady Featherington, Portia, and he thinks he's manipulated to get what he wants out of this, but it has like a twist at the end. And that twist at the end is because it's the mother bear, the mama bear energy doing something very cunning. She's cunning in her own right, Lady Featherington. And so that shows up with the moon in Capricorn, with that connection to those resources, and how she works her way through that scenario. But also that moon squares off with the sun in Aries. So this combination, now that's just a square between the moon and the sun, but that moon is the ruler of the eighth house of other people's resource and how that is managed. Now, the Bridgerton household is managed because they have Anthony. He is, the Viscount. It goes to the sun, right? And so it's like how those, assets will be managed, how they are managed. But we can see in the lens of the Featheringtons without a son, the precarious situation that's set up for the Lady Featherington, Portia Featherington, and her children, Prudence and Philippa and Penelope. So it's really interesting to see that play and how that sets up another kind of, it's not quite a T-square, but because the moon is in the second house, it kind of sets up by sign a T-square. And so I find that fascinating too. And I love that within that storyline of Jack, we now can see where this pops out. This Uranus in Taurus gives us kind of like the surprise. The surprise, there's multiple surprises at the end of season 2. One would be the surprise, like turn, like the underlying attraction and passion that Anthony and Kate have that can't be hidden anymore and is there, and then how that is revealed within the form of the bracelets, which is interesting. So there's a beauty element, like jewelry is the surprising thing that helps show the truth to everyone. And also we can see that Uranus squares off on the Venus, so it's happening to both the lead characters, the Anthony and Kate were at the wedding with Edwina, and then the reality and all of that kind of detail because of that surprise event, right? So that's the Uranus, the sudden event that cracks something open, okay? And it comes through the bracelets, all right? And we have also the surprising reveal that Portia gives to Uncle Jack about what's going to happen and how she takes control of the whole scenario. And it changes that as well, the trajectory for the Featheringtons. So it bides her time until whatever's going to happen with the Featherington sisters, her daughters, for her own security in the future without a Lord Featherington, but that will only go so far. And so she'll be counting on a Lord Featherington being born from her daughters. So to secure her fate within the context of this structure of the rules of engagement in the ton and how that works. So it's there too. And that is a lot of tension that comes out of that. But we also can say that this also gives us the tension that can happen to one of the sisters, which is now we're looking at Kate again, and the accident that sets up that ending a bit as well. So there's multiple unexpected sudden events, or kind of like what is happening with the storyline of the character that has this sudden kind of crack open of something, like a breaking open or breaking down. It's one or the other, right? And it's kind of like that. Something has been revealed, something is breaking down, something is, coming out from the shadows kind of detail because it hasn't been addressed kind of thing. And that's that breakthrough on that square with the Uranus touching on the square to Mars and to Venus. So again, the chart is giving us all these variables of meaning and layers and layers and layers. Another layer that I haven't addressed a lot here is the descendant is Gemini, because we have a Sagittarius rising, which I discussed about the horse. The descendant is the other as it pertains. And this is kind of like the series itself, season 2, and the audience. This can be something that we look in the layer of the audience receiving the show itself is the Mercury. We could also say that the fans of the show are the Venus here. So a lot of female fans who might recognize themselves as different and other, and how they might connect with the theme of season 2 Bridgerton because of seeing a different culture portrayed within the inclusivity of the show. So we have this diverse perspective and the adventure that we get to take with Bridgerton in that imagination play. So this other of the 7th house, it's also kind of the symbolic of the marriage partner and what they bring and all of the themes that are layered within it. And that ruling planet of Gemini, because it's always speaking about two, like the comparison of two things. We have Kate Sharma's character with Edwina, her sister. We have Uncle Jack compared to, what Anthony Bridgerton gives as an heir to the Bridgerton responsibility as a Viscount. And also, there's other two pairs perspective of this and that within the season 2 because of the other position of the Gemini on the 7th house. And that gives us a comparison, lots of a comparison. I'm sure there's others in there that what's coming to my mind right now is the comparison between Portia, Lady Featherington, and Violet's backstory around the death of the husband and the situation that it presents for both of those ladies, Lady Violet Bridgerton and Lady Featherington, because you can see how the story impacts them in that death. And so the death is like the South Node in Scorpio, gives us a perspective on that. And the difference of having a son or not having a son, and how it sets up for that perspective. We may engage with that as understanding wherever we are in relationship, we may have similar themes because some of the audience might have a partner. They might be heterosexual, they might be same-sex partners, but there can be this precarious situation. Not that we have like the same context of rules of engagement, but there are these things of how human nature is around security with having a partner, about just the how time rolls through and how we roll through time in our lives, and there's a certain security in having these connections with partners, and how it gives us more stability. It gives us, from just health, we understand now through studies that people who have partners later in life live longer. So there's this interesting kind of like background that the audience may be tuning into, watching this as a pleasurable thing to watch for fun, but it has these underlying themes that we would reflect on as well. And it gives us something to, consider for our own situation in life, about how we might think about partners, what we might look at, and how some humans look at partnership for a sense of security within the big world, right? So this is really interesting thing to consider as well, because it is Bridgerton. The power of the family is visible with the Pisces at the bottom, and also the Jupiter in Pisces. And so there's kind of like this concept that the Bridgerton has a vast situation for wealth, and that's reflected there too. And I don't know if there's other scenes. Maybe it might play out through Colin a little bit, about how he's going to protect the Featheringtons, especially Penelope, and how that plays in season 2. But also, I think it gives us a shape for Penelope's character in her, stashing her coins in her hidden work. Right. So there's a lot that's also there because of something that she happened upon that's actually providing a channel. And it's reflected on, I think, in Eloise's character when she's talking about that, and the freedom that it would give Lady Whistledown when she's openly talking about this, but she's not realizing who it is that has that and is doing that thing that, she figures out later, but it's part of the story. So it's fun. Another thing that we can look at here that is above the horizon. So we have the South Node is in that 12th house, which is kind of still a house. It's kind of what's in the unconscious mind, but also the places that are a little bit more public and contained, like hospitals or prisons or these kinds of things. Not saying that that's really any part of season 2 per se, but it's more that what else is above the horizon here? I think this being above the horizon, the South Node being above the horizon, is how much backstory we got relative to the death of the father, Lady Bridgerton's, the first Viscount. Right. So I think that's important to kind of take into consideration, that we had to have a lot of backstory to understand Anthony's character and his positioning himself for the marriage mart. Also, this planet, this is a dwarf planet. This is Ceres. Ceres in Gemini is a powerful kind of placement, because Ceres is, what we look at as symbolism of the mother that has deep power and wisdom and acts like, the Demeter Persephone storyline. So I always look at Ceres like, where is Ceres? Because it gives us kind of a storyline of the mother and how important that is within the context of everything, because of the season of the life. And also within Gemini, that's why I think there's this comparison between Lady Violet Bridgerton and Lady Featherington, Portia's character, and the comparison of the two. Of course, this is an imagination piece, but it gives that interesting perspective of the precarious situation of both mothers. I think it's more precarious for Violet Bridgerton that in the timing of her husband's death, that Anthony is so young and having to make these grown up choices as she's trying to deliver Hyacinth, who's probably breech. And oh goodness, that would be awful back in the day. But it would set up that precarious position, vulnerability of the mother kind of scenario of the this and that comparison. And then the moment that we see with also Lady Featherington's flipped psychology at the end of season 2 as it relates to what Uncle Jack wants to do, and she's not going to participate anymore. So she turns the con back on him. Oh, it's brilliant. I love the writing. There's also a Gemini thing. So there was a lot of beautiful twists and turns and flips around in season 2, and I think that's what makes it so enjoyable. The enemies to lovers, the this and that comparison, that shows up in that as well. We also have darker feminine themes emerge with the Black Moon Lilith in the 7th house as well. And so Black Moon Lilith is shadow material of the feminine and how it might show up. And when you have it in the Gemini, it's going to have a quality of the feminine comparison. So think about one of the dark feminine archetypal things that we women would face is comparison to another female, especially when resources and identity are part of the game, as they are on the Ton. And what gets highlighted about something that was actually in history about this marriage mark concept, and a lot more precarious, I'm sure, as we also see through how, what's her name? Cressida Cowper's character plays with in the context with Penelope, and the competition, and the sense of worth or sense of value, sense of worthiness, as one is cruel to the other to set herself up stronger. That's kind of that Black Moon Lilith dark feminine concept of competition, right? And that's a part of that whole partnering scenario, like how we might position ourselves with others. But, the precarious situation of the shadow material that's available there, it almost is an undercurrent also even between Edwina and Kate, and how she would not find herself, Kate Sharma's character, find herself worthy because of comparison, but also her own position of not wanting to hurt her sister. So it's a precarious position to be in. You can also maybe see the dark feminine of the Dark Moon Lilith within the what truly Penelope wants and the comparison. So it's like an underlying current between the desires and hopes and dreams of Penelope versus the desire, hopes, and dreams of Eloise when they are talking together. So these are all available in the show and season 2, and make it fun to contemplate that. Also, that competitive piece in the episode for The Choice, or even the one before, which is Fate, episode 5, The Unthinkable Fate. So those 2 episodes can also highlight some of that undercurrent of the Black Moon Lilith that's available between the comparison of this and that. So you can go and rewatch season 2 to refresh yourself and have fun again, exploring the themes that's available in the art. So I think I've covered many things that I think are available within the season 2 framework, and it's fun to explore these themes. I've discussed many pieces within the chart. Yeah. So there's also one more detail that just popped into my mind that I don't want to miss, is who played Lady Mary Sharma. I think her name is Shelley Khan. So that storyline of her story brings another aspect of the situation of some of the Black Moon Lilith energy as well from her storyline, and how she had to position her daughters based on the perception of the older couple tied to her, which I think is her parental. Yeah, that's the parents who judge the first, who is Kate Sharma's father, who I think she actually went off with before she met the father of Edwina. And so there was this kind of comparison to other, who followed the rules, who didn't follow the rules, because Lady Mary Sharma was following somebody because of how she felt about them from her heart. So kind of how Lady Violet Bridgerton got lucky that she fell in love with, I can't remember his name, the original Viscount, Anthony's father, and that she had, the opportunity there to make a choice based on her heart, but also it had, it felt followed a lot of the rules, even though in season 4 she talks to Benedict as him being him a son definitely of her, like definitely through and through her child in comparison to Anthony compared to, I think it's Edwin. I can't remember, Edwin Bridgerton, maybe. And his father, like he's, Anthony is very much like his father, where Benedict is very much like his mother. So I love all the connections and how they come out in the symbolism of the astrology and what we can glean off of that. In closing, the midheaven, which I didn't spend a lot of time, also has the rulership of Mercury. So there is something really powerful about the purpose of the show is, it's enemies to lovers is what they were, the tension, and then how that turns into the lovers, right? So the real highlight of the other and what it brings out in us, I think, is a huge theme for season 2. And again, the Mercury is in Pisces and highlighting the undercurrent of what's in the unconscious mind, who is removing our masks, and we are, vulnerable to them because the masks are not there in the context of, how I show up with the person, what do they activate in me? Because when we are attracted to someone, we are often making those connections within our energy field, and that energy field is reflected in our natal charts, and that's where we get synastry, like that connection. We don't understand why we have connections with certain people. The astrology would give you clues, but it's that pull between when, like the 10th house here is Virgo, and so that's a sense that it has the Kate Sharma is the governess type, sister to Edwina, preparing her. That's a skill, that's a Virgo, and it's also the unlikely target for the marriage mark, right? Like they're not looking at Kate as viable at all, and yet here she is with the family. So, and we also have her dog Newton, which is a small animal, which is also 6th house pet, kind of thing. In the natural zodiac, that would be Virgo. So it's kind of interesting the contrast between the dog, which is Newton, and the horses as themes from from the animal, the animals present in the series for season 2, and what role they play in that instinctual energy. So that's fun to look at. And then finally, I think, when we have, I think this has happened more than once in this chart, where we have the planet that rules the sign, like Moon rules Cancer, but Moon's in the second, opposite that. So there's this magnetism, that's a good word. There's magnetism between the pull for that. And there's also magnetism between the 10th house and the Mercury being down in the 4th house, but it is the magnifier towards the 10th. So becoming visible and the role that they play. And it also speaks to the mother-father context of 10th house, 4th house, and that looping, that magnetism within that context as well. And it creates the tension, which makes it a very incredible thing to kind of pull apart of how the characters develop and provide us insight of who they are and who they're becoming, and also how backstory plays into what they're going to, how they are going to, the pattern of behavior that emerges, these kinds of things. So that is a really important component of the season 2 chart, this pull between 2nd house, 8th house, and 4th house, 10th house, because of the planetary positions of rulership, and the strong 4th house, which is family. But it's also the Bridgerton family that is the one that's portrayed on the screen by the actors, the cast ensemble, but also the situation of the containment of people in homes and houses, and how much imagination is the escapism into something else for enjoyment and a little bit of a relief valve on the tension of the actual reality that we are living in at the time in 2021 and 20, and even into 22, we were still kind of going back and forth with the social distancing, what was available to us as access and what was not, what was available to us or not in the arts. Things were starting to emerge with wearing masks and things like that in 22. 2022 was like that, but 2021, when they were actually filming the production, and maybe even, I don't know, if I'd have to go back and look at the notes on behind the scenes for 2020, if they did anything in 2020, because 2020 was still precarious for the reason of the pandemic. But that's all in this chart. It's just beautiful. And then the vertex, just to tie it up with a last little detail here, in Cancer talks about also the situation of fate, because the vertex is a very fated point. And this is pulling in the moon, because the moon here is the ruler of the Cancer and the livelihood, resources, what's available to the individual woman, and then the family based on the situation of what are the rules of the society for access and security in respect to resources, and how that might look fated, So it's quite powerful in how we can take a look at that. And so in our next chart, we're going to be looking at season 3, part 1 and part 2. But in the meantime, I want to make sure that everybody is aware of I'm available for readings, and here is a QR code for that, and you can book me online. And my community, which is Astro Sages, I do share additional things there. Right now I'm doing the book club, and you can join. We are diving into charts so you can actually get extra exposure to different planetary archetypal meaning in the book club that I do. Pretty much we're targeting Saturdays. I have some that I'm skipping only because of my travel schedule, but otherwise they're pretty much on Saturdays. And you can join the community, no cost. It's just another place to play with astrology in a different kind of way, and more informal and casual, and ability to connect with others and explore astrology. So I hope to see you there in the community, or if I get a chance to meet with you one-on-one in a reading, it'll be lovely to share your astrology with you. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. And this has been a fun exploration of the season 2 astrology of Bridgerton. Thanks so much. Take care.